Hello, everyone, and thank you for participating in the 2024 DBE online training video series. This is our third training video, and it's all about preparing a proposal in response to an RFP, or request for proposal. We'll be looking at understanding what RFPs are, preparing an actual proposal, and then submitting the proposal. While there's usually no set way to prepare a proposal, some RFPs do include specific requirements such as page limits and mandatory components of information that you need to provide. And preparing a proposal is a mix of science and art. You need to meet the requirements of the proposal, but you also need to do it in a way that shows your company is best suited for the project and showcases your unique differentials. Ultimately, your proposal should convey the benefit that your organization can bring to each project. And so with that, let's get started. These are today's learning objectives that we're going to be going over. So the first one is just getting a general understanding of what an RFP actually is. We're going to look at the cost versus technical approach, talk about asking the right questions and how to formulate those questions, knowing the client and knowing your competition and why that's important, and then considering some ethics that go into submitting a proposal. Next, we're going to be looking at preparing the actual proposal. So we'll look at the elements of that process and what that looks like, specifically at an 8-step process for the preparation stage. And then lastly, we'll talk about submitting the proposal. So we're going to look at where to find and submit the proposal, knowing the important dates and the documentation that you need to review and potentially acknowledge when you submit the documents, following up on your submission, and then finally, we'll sum up with some best practices and tips for really helping your proposal stand out. And with that, let's get right into the very beginning here. So understanding the request for proposal, what is an RFP? An RFP is a document that formally announces a new project and solicits bids from qualified bidders. It's usually going to have these components that are outlined in the RFP: the project deliverables and the timeline, also called the scope, unique characteristics of the project, the proposal scoring process, and then format and submittal requirements. Now, when it comes time to actually formulate your proposal, there are basically two elements that it breaks down to: the technical approach and the cost approach. So the technical approach is actually how you're going to perform the scope of work that's outlined in the RFP. So it's talking about the documents you'll need, the way that you're going to approach it, some of the people that are going to be involved. Usually you'll have to supply some resumes, validating the credentials of the people that are going to be involved in the actual project. And then there's also the cost component. So this is exactly that. It's the cost. It's going to be a breakdown of all the different metrics and ways that you're going to charge for your service. Now, projects are typically awarded based on one of two metrics: lowest technically acceptable and best value. Lowest technically acceptable, more commonly referred to as lowest bidder, is going to be the lowest price of submissions that is able to effectively get the job done. And you can think of that as the same way that we hire contractors for our personal projects, such as if you want to get your windows redone, your doors, your floors. You shop around to a bunch of different contractors and you find who's able to do the work at the lowest price. The government's going to kind of use that same process in this type of method. The other one is best value. And while best value is still going to consider the cost, and they're going to want to go with the most economically advantageous option for them, they're taking a lot more other things into consideration that have a little bit more weight than just the cost. So they're going to focus heavily on past performance, credentials, the ability to get the work done. And we see this a lot more in consulting type projects, engineering consulting. They're going to really go for best value versus the lowest technically acceptable. So it's important to know the type of project you're going after and how they're going to be grading it. Now, contracts won't always state if it's going to be lowest bid or best value. And if it doesn't state it, that's a really good question to ask the contracting officer during the Q&A period. And we'll talk a little bit about that, formulating questions and which ones to ask in a bit here. The other thing is that a lot of these proposals or these RFPs will include a scoring rubric as well. And that rubric is going to lay out how they are going to actually score each proposal. So it could say 25% costs, 25% past performance, 50% licensure. It just depends on what the actual project is. So again, the more you understand what they're looking for and what they need, the more that you can tailor your proposal in a way that's going to best suit you for winning the project. So before we get into these three items, the very first step, which seems very intuitive, but it often doesn't get done to the fullest extent, the very first step of creating a proposal is to read the RFP thoroughly. So if you're new to RFPs, then you're going to want to read all of it, page to page, cover to cover. You're going to want to understand everything that's in there. This is also true if you're familiar with RFPs, but you're working with a new organization. When you do RFPs for the same organization over and over again, you'll start to see a lot of similarities in the jargon and the lingo that they're using in their RFPs, specifically with the legal information, the boilerplate stuff that they have on every single proposal. So you don't necessarily need to read every single word once you have a more familiarization with that particular organization. However, you are still legally obligated to everything that's in there. So claiming that, oh, I didn't know that was in there is not going to be a valid excuse when it comes time to actually perform on the project. So read the RFP, understand what the project scope is, what the timelines are, if there's a budget, what the budget limitations are, what the dates and timeline for submitting documents, asking questions are. You want to have all this stuff very well understood before you start diving into it. So that's the first step. Now, once you've read the RFP, you can do this first component here, prepare an information audit. So you're going to gather all necessary details to inform a thorough proposal. List all information needed to respond thoroughly to the RFP and identify the sources to obtain this data. And then attend the pre-bid meeting if available. And we'll talk about that in a little bit here, but you always want to attend a pre-bid meeting if one is offered. You won't always have one being offered, but in most cases, there will be some opportunity to either speak or meet with the contracting officer or some of the engineers or parties that are involved in the solicitation process. And you always want to attend those to ask questions, hear other people's questions, and kind of establish your presence in this particular proposal. The next is to conduct an internal review. So have team members review questions to ensure that they are clear, necessary, and cannot be answered by the RFP or general research. So questions is incredibly important because this is going to help you outline how to go about a proposal, or even if it's worth going about doing the work to submit this proposal. So if you can find the questions in the RFP, that should be checked off by that first step, reading it thoroughly. Or sometimes you can just do some easy general research and answer those questions. There is a time to submit questions and a time that you'll get those responses back. So if you can answer your own questions, that's just going to give you more time at the front end to be able to prepare a proposal versus having to wait for the contracting officer to formally release the answers to these questions. So anytime you can glean something from the RFP or look it up through maybe the organizational website or just general searching, you're going to want to take that action instead of waiting for the questions. Contracting officers typically publish a collection of all submitted questions with responses. So after you do submit the questions, all the organizations that are interested in this particular solicitation will submit their questions at a certain time, and then the contracting officer will answer all of them, and usually that will be posted in a public place to review. And that's a great opportunity to not only see the answers to your questions, but see what other questions were being asked. Gives you a general idea of the landscape that you're competing in based on how many other companies are asking questions and what kind of questions they're asking. And you could even have something answered or get a little bit more information on something that you may have misunderstood by looking at the answers to some of those other questions. And the third item here, craft those relevant questions. So developing strategic questions that demonstrate your understanding and commitment to the project's success and focusing on areas that are not clear in the RFP. Like I said, by reading the RFP thoroughly, you should avoid or eliminate the potential of asking a question that's already been answered on a specific page. Pay special attention to the Q&A and other special deadlines such as site visits or letter of intent requirements. Sometimes solicitations require you to submit a letter of intent saying that you're going to be submitting a proposal. So if you pass that date without submitting a letter of intent, you could eliminate yourself from being able to participate in this particular project. Same thing with site visits and those Q&A deadlines. Those deadlines are hard set deadlines. So there's not really any wiggle room for you to ask questions after the fact unless another Q&A session is opened up. Why know the client? Your business needs to be aware of the client's expectations and offer solutions that meet those expectations. Having a firm understanding of the client's role, mindset, and culture helps conceptualize your approach and determine if your values align with the client's organization. So you want to align your approach to the client's organizational values. And when we say client, we're talking about the contract officer, or specifically the agency that's putting out the solicitation. You want to tailor your custom solutions to your client's unique characteristics, and then request constructive feedback. So the big thing here is that your proposals is not a one size fits all approach. There are some things you can do in your proposal writing process that you can do for all proposals to streamline the process. But when you're developing it, you don't want to just copy and paste from different organizations. You really want to tailor your proposal to the organization and make sure that your keywords and the things that you're highlighting and offering are the exact things that your client needs. A good example is to think of this like a resume. When you're applying for jobs, you have your foundational resume, but for every job you apply, you want to make little tweaks to it so that they have the right keywords. You're putting the applicable job experience at the top and making sure that the person reading it is seeing a direct connection from what you're offering to what they need. And it's the same thing with the proposal. It's like a resume that you're submitting to this organization. And you can do this, you can check a lot of these boxes with client research. So by just going onto certain websites, looking at past projects, and just kind of familiarizing yourself with the structure of that organization, you can investigate the client's history, mission, recent press releases, and industry standing to tailor your response to their strategic goals. Also, by attending network and industry events, you can meet people from that agency and you can ask them face to face a little bit about their organization and what they're looking for, and specifically what their pain points are. Sometimes that's not going to be addressed in an RFP, but if you can tailor your solution that you can hit the pain points that aren't even things that they're identifying, but they feel, that's all the more that's going to kind of differentiate your company from the others and give you a better shot at winning the project. Now, on the other side, why know the competition? Contracting is unique in the world of business because the entire pool of contracting businesses, any one potential adversary can also be a potential ally. So competitors bid against each other to establish partnerships depending on the contracts released in the overall contracting landscape. So competitor research can give you insights on who's winning, why they're winning, and who you'd like to pursue teaming or joint venture opportunities with. It's important to remember that your competitors could be potential allies. You could joint venture and go after a project together. But it also kind of helps you understand the competitive landscape you're in and what your competition can offer that maybe you can't. And if you see weaknesses in your own organization, you want to be able to tailor your proposal to show the organization how you can overcome those challenges or why your particular organization has different advantages that will make it more beneficial to work with. So that's strategic positioning, understanding how you can position yourself against your competition to be more competitive in the solicitation arena. You can identify those potential teaming arrangement, like I said, forming joint ventures with other similar firms or firms that can maybe offer certain work components that you can't, and you can offer ones that they can't to form a stronger proposal. And then understanding market trends and opportunities. So seeing typically who wins these types of projects. Are they national level organizations or are they local? Are they very large organizations or are they more mom and pop shop type organizations? So by understanding the overall landscape and the market trends, you can better position yourself to either win or even make the decision of if this is a project that you want to spend the time and effort going into. So speaking about that competition, how do you analyze them? We're going to start with the competitive analysis. So many people have probably heard of a SWOT analysis, strength, weaknesses, opportunity, threats. But there's also a competitive SWOT analysis where you're basically competing a SWOT analysis for your competition. So conduct a competitive SWOT analysis to assess potential competitors' strengths and weaknesses, opportunities and threats, understanding their likely approaches. You can utilize government databases such as sam.gov, any type of metropolitan council websites, any type of state, federal websites, things like that to see what kind of NAICS codes and what kind of advantages your competition has. you can go straight to their websites. That kind of helps you understand maybe the past projects they worked on, what kind of equipment, what kind of personnel they have, and then analyze past contract awards and performance. So specifically, if you can view a company's capability statement and you can see past projects they've worked on, that gives you a good indication of what their capabilities are and maybe some of their strengths and weaknesses compared to your firm. And then developing a unique selling proposition, a USP development. So define what makes your offer unique compared to your competitors and emphasize this in your proposal. Identify your differentiators. Now, it's impossible to do this without knowing what your competition can offer. It's hard to make yourself stand out if you don't even know what you're trying to stand out against. So that's why analyzing the competition is so important. And the last piece of kind of understanding your competition is specifically if there's an incumbent, meaning that when they put out a project for bid, is there somebody who has been doing this project in the past and likely may continue to do it in the future? Or is there no incumbent? This is a new project and there's really a wide open net and the organization's open-minded on who's coming into it. That's helpful for you to know because that again will help you differentiate yourself from somebody who has already been doing the project or differentiate people who could potentially start this project. And the next part here is considering contracting ethics. So since government contracts are largely funded by public dollars, the contract and the on-site performance of the project itself are held to strong ethical standards. They're very transparent, they're very open to the public, so making sure everything's on the up and up is critical. Such concerns commonly include conflicts of interest and environmental and social impacts. So a conflict of interest, when personal interests interfere with professional obligations. So an example of this could be that an evaluator, maybe on the contracting organization side, favors a bidder due to personal relationships. That would be a conflict of interest. Bid rigging and collusion, when competitors conspire to manipulate the bidding process. So let's say a bunch of bidders get together and agree to set prices or allocate contracts among themselves, and maybe price gouge the government by saying we'll all not charge less than this a month. That's definitely a contractual ethic, and it's actually illegal to compare prices in that way. Insufficient transparency and unfair evaluation practices. So a lack of clarity in the evaluation criteria or the decision-making process and biases in the evaluation process against certain bidders. So an example of that could be an evaluator provides an unfair advantage to a specific bidder, or conversely, has a negative interaction with a particular company and then gives them an unfair rating or evaluation because they personally don't like that company or have had bad experiences in the past. Every contract, every proposal needs to be judged and scrutinized at that moment based on that proposal and that solicitation. You can look at past performance, but considerations of the past should not be brought into the evaluation of the current contract. Intellectual property concerns, misuse or unauthorized disclosure of proprietary information. So this could be if an RFP documents contain sensitive information that's leaked to competitors, such as say there is an incumbent and in the RFP, they put information about that incumbent. That's definitely an ethical line that's been crossed. And then environmental and social impact. Failure to consider the environment or social impact of a project. So let's say that the RFP or addenda mentions EPA or SWIP guidelines that must be followed on a project. This may or may not be accompanied by a requirement to describe or prove that you're either certified or have the knowledge and experience to adhere to environmental regulations that are relative to the project. Even if it's not needed, it's always worth demonstrating an understanding of environmental and social impacts that are or may be attributed to a project, and describe how you manage project impacts to environment, public life, or cultural concerns when applicable. You want to ensure that all communications and dealings with the client and partners are transparent and documented. So even if it doesn't say in a construction project, how is this going to affect the public? Adding that into your proposal in some way, addressing it, how you're going to mitigate as much as to the greatest extent possible impact to the general public will show that you're understanding the full second, third, fourth order tier effects of what you're doing. And it shows that you're really tuned into this project on a much larger scale than simply the scope. And that can help make your firm stand apart as well.
So let's talk about the actual preparation of the proposal, the final document that you're going to be delivering to the contracting officer, to the government, to hopefully win the bid. And to hit on a point that we mentioned earlier, thoroughly reading the RFP itself is key, and we'll give you some tips on how to do that. But the other thing I wanted to mention is how there are sometimes with certain RFPs additional documentation that are attached to that, right? So you'll have the main document that describes what they're looking for in the response. You might have some attached plans, lots of different addenda, and then there's usually some legal items as well. What you'll find over time as you look at more of these is that some of these are boilerplate. So if you're already familiar with some of that boilerplate, you don't necessarily have to read it every single time. But if you're not, we strongly recommend taking the time to read through that and make sure that you understand all of the extras that are associated with the RFP. So let's talk more about preparing the actual proposal. Comprehensive reading and proofreading. We mentioned that a lot in this presentation and can't stress it enough. Read the RFP and all the documents, identify the deliverables, the requirements, and anything else extra that could be required to be submitted along with your response. A lot of times there's different documents and statements that you need to sign or initial or something to have it be a complete response. And if you have a great proposal that you submit and you didn't submit a legal document you're supposed to sign, you might be out of the running at that point. So, but here's some tips on reading through the RFP itself. So element highlighting, that's essentially just color-coded highlighting. You're using highlighters as you read the printed document. You could also do it digitally. A lot of different programs like Adobe and Word have you can highlight things. So either way, but what you're doing is you're using specific colors to call out specific sections of the RFP. Personally, I like to use green for items that affect cost, pink for items that are related to personnel and qualifications, and yellow for items that affect the technical side of things and how the work is going to be performed and what that narrative is. And that plays right into structure mapping. Really, all that means is creating an outline that mirrors the RFP structure itself. Each section of the proposal should correspond to a section of the RFP, right? So, for example, if you are looking at the RFP and it says Section 4, personnel and qualifications, then on your response, at some point in there, you're going to have Section 4, personnel and qualifications, and then you're going to respond accordingly. So what you have to remember is that with every RFP, there's a human being, a contracting officer on the other end who's reading each response. And oftentimes, they have, of course, the RFP on their end, and they will have a checklist of their own or a scoring sheet or something, and they're going through item by item, line by line. And that's how they efficiently check to see how qualified your response is. And so you want to make it as easy as possible for them. So keeping things in order and speaking to the points that are directly going to affect how they care about your response, that is very important. So checklist creation, developing a submission checklist based on the RFP's instructions. Sometimes RFPs actually come with checklists and sometimes they don't. So definitely make one of your own or add to the one that's provided. Again, the goal is not to make the contracting officer have to hunt for information that they need to help them decide in your favor, or to make it hard for them to score your response versus their own checklist. Customized solutions, right? So creating solutions that are unique to the client's requests and problems. This demonstrates a deep understanding of the client's problems and lets you tailor your solutions to fit their specific needs. So avoid generic responses. Sometimes people have templates they use for RFP responses, and that's fine, but you want to customize it as much as possible for each individual response that you're going to craft. Show them how your approach is uniquely beneficial to them. Client-specific language and examples, right? So using terminology and examples that resonate with the client's industry and culture, citing previous work with similar organizations or challenges can also be very persuasive. That's a really good one. If you have past performance examples that you're submitting with your proposal, actually describing challenges encountered on the project and how you solved them is a great approach, because there's always challenges, things that go wrong on contracts. And so if you can show a contracting officer, hey, here's some stuff that went wrong, but here's how we overcame it. Here's how we worked with the government to overcome it for a satisfactory result. That's huge. So focusing on your approach, past performance, how you can benefit the client, and not talking too much about yourself, but talking more about here's what I can do for you, right? Focusing less on the features of your company and more on the benefits that you can provide to the government or the prime contractor. Innovative solutions. So proposing solutions that address the client's needs more effectively than traditional methods. Always a good approach whenever possible. So addressing the client's needs more efficiently or effectively than traditional methods, highlighting any unique technologies, methodologies, or approaches that you use, which plays right into what we just talked about showing how you can benefit them. And then adding value. So include value-added offerings that enhance the main proposal without significant cost increases, such as additional services, extended maintenance, training sessions, improved warranty terms. Kind of like we talked earlier about maybe an RFP doesn't address the environmental or social impacts of the project, but you decide to do that. That's added value. You're building added value into that response that they didn't ask for, but they're going to recognize what you're talking about. So presenting a clear and compelling narrative, right? So crafting a strong executive summary to lead with that captures the essence of your proposal and makes a compelling case for why your company is the best choice. That executive summary, typically at the very front, the very top of that proposal, that's your first impression. And we all know what they say about first impressions, and it's true. So you want to make a good impression with that. Have a storytelling approach, a narrative approach to this technical side of things. It sounds maybe counterintuitive because it's a technical proposal, it's a technical response, it's some variety of supply and distribution or construction or engineering, something like that. But you still want to have a kind of a narrative or storytelling approach to make the proposal more engaging. So describe how your solution has evolved or how it has successfully addressed similar challenges in the past. What you're doing with this approach in talking about not only your past performance, but also responding to the RFP and how you're going to do the work. Having this narrative approach helps the contracting officer imagine in their mind these benefits, how you're going to benefit them, how you're going to solve problems with them. And that's worth its weight in gold. Proven track record. So providing evidence of past successes with similar projects or clients. This can include testimonials, case studies, performance metrics that can help all substantiate your claims, right? And that ties in really well with what we talked about with your past performance and challenges that you overcame. And then finally here, certifications and qualifications are number 4 point. Highlighting any industry-specific certifications, awards, or recognitions that enhance your credibility. It doesn't have to be a lot. In fact, you may not have room given the page count limitations on a given response, but carving out a little bit of space to highlight here are our accolades and our certifications, that only serves to improve your credibility. And point number 5 here, be transparent and detailed in your budgeting. So detailed financials, talking about the cost side of the proposal. Offer a clear, detailed, and justified budget. Being transparent about how you arrived at your figures can help build trust with the contracting officer when they're reviewing that part of it. And flexible pricing options. So provide a few different pricing models or options that allow the client to choose based on their budget or level of service desired. Everybody loves having options, and with contracting proposals, it's no different. Number 6, focusing on exceptional design and usability. Now we're talking about kind of the format and layout of these documents, right? So using professional layouts, infographics, high quality visuals, that's always a great idea. It's one of the most commonly missed things in technical responses is that there's no images, there's no graphics. And again, space allowing, we want to try to fit some of those in. You want to be able to visually represent your success, whether it's a picture of a job site, uh, a picture of work being performed, or a infographic of your quality assurance process, or perhaps a graph that shows some kind of financial or material quantifiable result. Professional presentation. So ensure that the proposal is not only informative, but visually appealing, right? Uh, Usability features. Consider interactive elements within your proposal. Most proposal submissions nowadays are digital, whether it's a PDF or a Word document or something else. And unless otherwise stated in the instructions in the RFP, there's nothing that says that you can't put in a link to a YouTube video. For maybe you have a YouTube video that's like an ad for your business, or some footage of a completed project, or something like that, or maybe it's a presentation that you've done. Inserting that link in and calling it out can be a great idea, and well-organized digital submission can enhance the user experience. So that's just kind of an optional thing to help your proposal stand out to the contracting officer. And then finally here, items 7 and 8. So proactive communication. We already touched on this earlier about the Q&A period. And most RFP documents, if that contract has a Q&A period, it's very common. You want to pay attention to what that Q&A period is. That deadline for the Q&A period is your chance to ask the contracting officer anything. Again, assuming you've read the RFP documents thoroughly, you're not presenting any questions to the contracting officer that have already been covered, but you're calling out things that they didn't consider, they didn't put in. And again, once that period is done, going back and looking at the responses and what the competitors ask and what those responses are too. So engage with the client before submitting the proposal to clarify any ambiguities and demonstrate your proactive approach, and attend the pre-bid meeting if one is available as well. That usually is in the timeline along with the Q&A deadline and all the other deadlines. And then having a follow-up strategy. This is something that, kind of like we talked about, making a checklist and highlighting stuff in the RFP. Have a follow-up strategy before you go into this. Detail to yourself how you plan to engage with the client contracting officer after submitting the proposal to discuss any further needs or adjustments. You know, a lot of times the contracting officer is under no obligation to tell you that you've lost, or what those deficiencies were. So having a follow-up strategy to check and see if they've made a decision on the contract yet, or if there's a potential for a kind of a breakdown with them, sort of a retrospective on why they didn't choose you. That's great. So that all goes into the follow-up strategy. And then finally, including a robust risk management plan. Some RFPs call out this specifically. They ask to see a risk assessment mitigation strategy. They want to see if you have a risk management plan, but if you have the space to add one, highly recommended that you craft one and put it in there. It, again, is part of that proactive approach. It shows you're thinking ahead, and it helps build trust with the contracting officer. Identifying potential risks associated with the project and proposing effective mitigation strategies for those risks. This shows foresight and preparation and reassures the client of your project management capabilities, alongside you showing that you can successfully perform the work. And so let's talk about team collaboration on preparing the proposal. Obviously, if you're one person doing this yourself, we encourage you to try to find an extra set of eyes to help you, even if it's just for proofreading purposes. So role assignment, if you do have multiple people in your company, assigning specific roles based on team members' strengths, such as research, writing, editing, design, whatever it is, having those specific roles assigned kind of makes it a collaborative process and forms a checks and balances scenario that typically results in a stronger product. For example, if you're not a strong writer, but you have the experience to seek out and identify potential contracts, you want to put your time and effort into what gets the most return on investment. So maybe you're the research person, and maybe this person over here is the writer. And so you're working together to craft a better product. Conducting brainstorming sessions, actually having meetings, whether they're in person or remote, with your team, and organizing these sessions to discuss innovative approaches to the project's challenges. There's an old quote that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And so, yes, there's always deadlines, and timeliness is important. But if you want to have a better product and you have the personnel and the skills able to leverage and make it a collaborative effort, highly recommended that you do so. And so managing timelines there at the end here, establishing internal deadlines for each section of the proposal to ensure the final submission is timely and well coordinated. So, maybe you have specific sections of the response assigned to individual people. Maybe this person is handling the risk management part. Maybe this person's handling the technical approach to the scope of work. Maybe this person is handling the section of qualified personnel, and maybe also the past performance sections. You want to have internal deadlines, whether they're the same day or staggered, however that looks, because those sections are going to go into what is the final product, and the cost as well, right? So you have that final deadline where everything has to be submitted, but with so many moving parts in any given response, it does not hurt to have an individual deadline for each section that people are working on. And then finally here, in talking about preparing the proposal, preparing the budget and pricing. The cost component is a major consideration in awarding a government contract. Companies need to be confident in their estimates and budgets to remain profitable in a competitive market with tight margins. So break down the project into tasks and estimate the cost for each task, considering labor, time, equipment, materials, overhead, whether you're using burdened rates or unburdened rates, performing a quantity takeoff. Those are all specifics that are only going to make your cost proposal stronger. And also verify if things like bonding and insurance are required, which typically will be spelled out in the RFP. And if it's not, it doesn't hurt to ask during the Q&A period. So again, plan how resources will be allocated throughout the project phases in your cost response, considering variables that could change your cost estimates. And we've seen even more of that now in the last few years, right? Where different things can affect supply chain and distribution. So building forecasting into that cost proposal is also a great idea. Fluctuation in prices of materials, fuel, lodging, and technology, developing contingency plans for possible occurrences, special taxes or fees based on the project location. A lot of times there's different insurance requirements whether you're doing business in a different state. And so that can drastically impact the overall cost. It's also something that, if it's missed, can really come back to hurt you in the long run. So say that you're based out of Nebraska and you're bidding on a project in Minnesota, and it's not mentioned in the RFP, but you need to be insured in the state of Minnesota to do that project. And just say hypothetically that those insurance costs are quite a bit of money. Now, once you win the project and you get so far into it, now all of a sudden hey, where's this insurance? Now you have to get it, and you didn't build it into your cost. Now you've kind of eaten into your profit. So, and then finally deciding on a pricing model, whether it's fixed amount, time and materials, value-based. It has to align with the client's expectations and your financial goals. And these kind of pricing model options are usually defined in the RFP, but they're sometimes not. Once again, it's a great question to ask if you're not sure of the contracting officer during that Q&A period.
Great. And now we're going to go to the final section here, actually submitting the proposal. So submitting the proposal, it depends on where the proposal is coming from. A lot of times in the RFP, it's going to spell out exactly where you need to submit it to or whom you need to submit it to. The picture here is from the Office of State Engineers, Office of State Engineer in South Dakota. So you can find a lot of opportunities here. You may also be going through some other South Dakota procurement portals as well. It doesn't really matter where you find the project, just as long as you know how to submit it and where to submit it to. So that's the most important part, is knowing who does it need to go to and when does that need to happen. So number 2 here, carefully read the request for proposal. Again, we've seen this multiple times in every stage of this process. So review all applicable schedules, clauses, and attachments. The solicitation is designed to provide proposing vendors with all the information needed to write a successful proposal. So like Chris was mentioning, there may be addenda, there may be additional changes that have happened that you have to sign and say that I acknowledge this, I have seen this, and I'm still submitting. So that's important that you, again, read the proposal thoroughly and understand all of these things. Quick tip here is that before developing your proposal, make sure you can comply with all the requirements and can perform the work. Again, sounds like a very intuitive thing to do, but this is often missed because sometimes there's a specific licensure, specific requirement, or specific time frame of a project that you have to have in order to be eligible that can be easily missed, because there's a lot of pages in a proposal. It could be 20, 30 pages, and it's easy to miss one requirement that may no longer make you eligible for the proposal. So before, if you get to a point and you say, okay, we definitely want to submit a proposal for this project, make sure you double check the requirements and make sure that you can even perform the work. If you have to rent equipment, make sure that there's equipment to rent, especially during, if it's high construction season, it can be very difficult to, acquire that equipment. So you want to make sure that you're not going to run into these problems down the line and incur higher costs. And again, have that eat into your profit. Attend the pre-proposal meeting. So information can be found on the invitation to bid. Again, this RFP, this invitation, they can all look differently depending on where you're submitting a proposal to. This is also from the Office of State Engineer. This is how their invitations to bid look. You can see the part here that says there will be an on-site pre-bid meeting on August 7, 2024 at 11:30 a.m. Central Time. This is always a good opportunity to meet, ask questions, get your name out there, and get a little bit more insider information on the parameters of the project. So you always want to attend the pre-proposal meeting. This is the only opportunity to speak directly with the project manager during the solicitation or bidding process. Ask those questions, clarify those requirements, and take note of the other bidders and of their questions. Next, submit questions in writing. The invitation to bid, the notice for RFPs will include a contact to submit questions to, so pay close attention to the due date for questions. As you can see in this invitation, it gives you an individual and their phone number and email of who to actually ask those questions, as well as that's the same individual to get the plans and specs from. So understanding who are your POCs in the process and when do you need to contact them, that's all part of the proposal submission process. Complete and include all required forms. So failure to submit accurate and required documentation may result in ineligibility or further consideration of the proposal by the council, the approving agency. Every RFP is different and the required forms can change. So read the proposal requirements carefully. Some examples of these forms include statement of qualifications and relevant firm experience, detailed work plan addressing each of the tasks outlined in the scope of work, a detailed price proposal executed by an officer of the firm, potentially an affirmative action certificate of compliance or affirmative action certification statement, subcontractor information form. If you're planning on subcontracting work out, you usually need to identify those subs in your proposal, not something that would happen after the fact, especially if you're reaching out to other DBEs and trying to meet a goal on a project. Anything regarding debarment, suspension, ineligibility, and voluntary exclusion, lobbying restriction certification, disadvantaged business enterprise DBE information and certifications, and disclosure and certification regarding conflicts of interest. So sometimes there's a lot of forms required, sometimes they're not. It's just important for you to be familiar with that. And if you're confused, to ask that question. So the next thing is submit your proposal on time. Submittals after the stated close date and time in the solicitation document will be returned unopened. The important thing here is that if you're submitting by mail, you want to obviously give it enough time for the proposal to reach at the appropriate time, because anything received after the close date and time will not be accepted, and that's what's going to be sent back. On the other end, in the more modern era, when you're submitting things electronically, you also don't want to wait till the last minute. If the proposal's due at 12 o'clock on a Tuesday, you don't want to wait till 11:45 on that Tuesday just to find out that your internet's down, or there's a power outage, or something's happening, your computer's battery dies, something crazy happens that doesn't allow you to actually submit it. We have heard stories of this happening before, and that's not an appropriate excuse to get an extension. So you want to give yourself enough time to actually submit something and not push yourself up to the very last second. Number 7, be prepared. So during the proposal evaluation stage, you may be asked to clarify your proposal and even enter into negotiations. So just again, sometimes you submit a proposal and it could be a while before you hear back. You want to be prepared for the second you do hear back, you have the information to provide, you're ready to talk negotiations, you're ready to talk about your tech approach, your cost approach, and make adjustments if needed. Depending on the nature of the services being purchased, proposing firms need to be prepared for potential interviews, site visits, and demonstrations. Again, it will usually be outlined in the RFP if there's going to be a multi-stage interview process, but depending on the caliber of proposals, that may be added in at last minute, or they may ask for additional documentation. So once you submit it, you're not done. You still need to be prepared to follow up and provide more information if asked to do so. This is our last slide here, and it's just kind of some tips for a strong proposal. So a good proposal will clearly explain how a firm meets the technical requirements and demonstrate how it's best for the council, for the DOT, for the State Office of Engineer, whatever the actual certifying or soliciting agency is. General marketing and sales literature may detract from your proposed solution, and your proposal should be creative and not appear as a canned response. So again, we're not just copying and pasting every single time we do a proposal. We're tailoring it to that organization, to that contracting officer, and to that project. The order of proposal content should follow and match the order of sections in the RFP. This allows the evaluators to know that you have addressed all aspects of the RFP and are familiar with the requirements. And that's what Chris had mentioned, is that if Section 4 says personnel, your Section 4 should be addressing personnel, not be your cost approach. You don't want them to have to be searching for all these things to get the information, or searching for all the stuff to make sure you addressed everything. And the last thing here is to demonstrate your advantages. So contracts will be awarded to the proposer who is able to demonstrate the most advantage based on their technical, cost, and other components as reviewed by the evaluation panel. It's always a good idea to have, once you finish a proposal, to have somebody else review it who wasn't working on that proposal. And that gives you a fresh set of eyes, and you can ask them questions about, does this make sense? Are we addressing everything that you saw in the scope? Are we showing our unique capabilities and how we can approach the project and thinking on the big picture? You know, when you have everybody working on the proposal, everybody gets so attached to it, it's easy to miss things like that. And at the other end, you want to make sure it makes sense to the contracting officer. So again, one of the best tips is have a new set of eyes review it and make sure that it all makes sense and it's addressing all the areas that need to be addressed as per the RFP. So thank you for taking the time to attend this presentation. You'll see here this slide has our contact information, our phone number, and emails. Feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions or want any more information about preparing a proposal or even interpreting an RFP. And be sure to check back next month for our final training video, which is going to be on managing contract changes and talking about how to navigate those difficult processes and conversations in the middle of a contract, especially if you're a subcontractor trying to do your job and challenge what a prime is asking you to do. So again, if you have any questions, please not hesitate to reach out, and thanks again for participating in today's training.